As to the charge contained in count 1 of the indictment, murder in the first degree, at this time, I will adjudge you to be not guilty. As to
this in an Orange County courtroom about 3 hours ago now, Casey Anthony found not guilty. The verdict read around 2:15 this afternoon in an Orange County courtroom. Not guilty of first-degree murder, not guilty of aggravated child abuse, not guilty of aggravated manslaughter of a child, guilty only of providing false information to law enforcement. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that in just a couple of minutes with our legal experts about what kind of penalty she could be facing from here forward.
As our continuing coverage of this verdict comes in from both here and Orlando, we want to go to Rochelle Ritchie in our newsroom, where the state attorney for the circuit there spoke with reporters a short while ago. Rochelle.
Well, Michael and Shan, the prosecution team, along with Orange County Sheriff Jerry Demings, held an independent press conference away from the courthouse. It's the first time we've heard from State Attorney Lawson Lamar since Casey Anthony was indicted 3 years ago and since her non-guilty verdict was read. Now, in the press conference, Mr. Lamar said this case has never been about the defendant, Casey Anthony. He says instead it's always been about getting justice for little Kaylee, finding the truth and proving it. He says while he does respect the juror's decision, he is not pleased.
We're disappointed with the verdict today and surprised because we know the facts and we put in absolutely every piece of evidence that existed. Our team did an exemplary job. I'm proud of them and I stand by their work. I never ever criticize a jury. Theirs is the task of deciding what to believe. Reasonable doubt as to each and every element in a case, especially a case like this, which is a mosaic of proof with no smoking gun and a tiny victim who is reduced by time and the elements to skeletal remains, those remains lacking in any chemical evidence that could be brought forward. This was a dry bones case. Very, very difficult to prove.
Now, Mr. Lamar went on to say he and his team will go back to work tomorrow to solve the more than 100 murder cases in Orange County, 11 of which are children. Now, my colleague Carolyn Schofield has been in Orlando since the jury began to deliberate on this case, and she brought up some of the comments that Sheriff Jerry Demings had mentioned, where he talked about people respecting the juror's decision and being civil. Now, I want to add to that, he also asked anyone who doesn't live in the neighborhood of the Anthony family to stay out of that area, and he also said that deputies would be on patrol to make sure that does happen. Michael and Shannon, back to you.
Again, reaction in Orlando, where, as we said at the outset, viewers there have been able to watch this trial from beginning to end. We're joined again by our legal experts, Michael J. O'Rourke, former longtime prosecutor in Palm Beach County, Michelle Suskauer, well familiar to you as our News Channel 5 legal analyst, noted defense lawyer. You talked before the break about your surprise here. What now for Casey Anthony?
Well, what now is we have a sentencing hearing. The sentencing hearing is scheduled for Thursday. The judge is not wasting any time because Casey Anthony is in custody. She has been acquitted of the most serious charges. So what comes next is the judge is going to make a decision. It's up to the judge, not the jury, to make a decision as to what to sentence her to. And because of the nature of these charges, he could very well, and what I expect, although I have been wrong, and I was wrong with this verdict, I think a lot of us were, is he could give her the time she's already served.
And you actually said that maybe, perhaps, the defense attorney should have asked for that right then and there.
I really thought that maybe they should have said, let's proceed to sentencing now and let's get her out. But I think the judge wants to sort of review things in his own mind and sort of let everything settle, the dust settle a little bit. But he may very well give her the time she's already served, which is several years, or he could give her probation. I don't think that he's going to send her to prison. I really don't.
So again, you were just watching Casey Anthony celebrating, hugging her attorneys there, Jose Baez and Cheney Mason. And, a lot was made of Cheney Mason in some of the posts after all this today. Some said that the job that Cheney Mason did, putting up that reasonable doubt scale a couple of days ago before those jurors, that may have been what changed the course on this trial, in this trial.
Well, I think Cheney Mason is a great lawyer. He's very folksy. He's very down home. But I think that just really honing in on what the judge is going to instruct you. And in every case, the judge instructs, and they read directly from the language, so it's not actually the first time the jurors hear it. So as defense lawyers, we always will read the reasonable doubt instruction to jurors and say, this is what you're going to hear. This is what reasonable doubt is, and talk about the burden of proof and the presumption of innocence.
Let me ask Michael O'Rourke, longtime prosecutor. Listen, they've come out, they're professionals, they talk about the fact that, of course, we do, in our system, we all accept that jury verdict. Nonetheless, what's going on in that state attorney's office right now? What's going on with the prosecution team? We should note that the prosecutors from the courtroom, Mr. Ashton and Ms. Burdick, did not show up. Only the state attorney himself spoke on their behalf. What's that like right now? They're human, the second guessing. What's the mood there? What are the emotions? Where do you back up and say, what could we have done differently?
Well, first of all, I think anybody that watched this case has to agree in watching the closing statements that the prosecution did a marvelous job. This case was not lost from their perspective for them not being persuasive. It was lost, I believe, my feeling is it was lost because I'm not sure this jury quite understood that you didn't need the specific proof. This was a circumstantial evidence case. The defense did what they could. They threw everything up against the wall.
Accidental drowning. Maybe the dad and mom helped cover it up.
Maybe George being an abusive father, a philanderer. All of this stuff is out there. When you think about that, all of that evidence that was gathered, it really has no relevance to the issue of whether Casey was responsible for this. The real thing that that the prosecutor is looking at right now is, from my understanding, is they had tons of evidence that they poured through, and they sifted through it, and they made a determination, we're going to go with this direction. One of the strong parts that I thought they have was, and it was talked about in closing, was the duct tape across the face. 3 pieces of duct tape. And I'm still baffled why a jury didn't consider that longer than they did.
The computer searches.
All of those things. But again, because of the circumstantial nature of this case, apparently this jury was looking for something more that they could get their hands on to tie this to Casey Anthony.
Was it the dysfunctionality alleged of the family that overwhelmed the circumstantial evidence in your view as they went behind closed doors and said, listen, we have a woman's life in our hands, here's what we have presented? Your thoughts?
I'm sure that all of those extraneous, extemporaneous, and extraordinary circumstances that were not part of the actual murder or death of this child played a part in that, and I think that jury, as a result, did not use the common sense test and applied only issues with regard to how it applied to the death of this child. They brought in all sorts of things from the outside, but that's to the defense's credit that they did that.
Michelle, very quickly, we're headed to break, but just rebut that if you can. Where did the state prosecutor, where did they get off track?
Well, I think there was one thing that Linda Burdick said in her rebuttal, and she started out. I loved her rebuttal, but there was one thing I was a little bit offended about when she started talking about common sense, and she said, you know, I know you don't have to be told this, and I'm really scared that you're not going to use your common sense. If I was this juror, I'd be like, are you kidding me? Like, why are you telling me that I'm not going to use my common sense? I don't leave my common sense at the door. They don't leave their life experiences at the door. I don't know. You don't know what offended them. You don't know what they didn't buy into. But they were not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's the problem.
And until or unless the jurors speak, and thus far they have said they absolutely will not, we will never have direct insight into that, but we will be back with our special coverage in just a moment.